Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And now we will proceed to session one. Session one is held under the theme of ASEAN Connectivity, Progress, Challenges, and Future Opportunities. Now, the session will discuss the current status and challenges of ASEAN connectivity and also identify future opportunities to enhance Korea's contribution to ASEAN connectivity. Now, 5 amazing, outstanding speakers are joining us for this session. And His Excellency Im Sung-nam, former ROC ambassador to ASEAN, will guide us through as the moderator of this session. Now, before we move into our first presentation, I would like to kindly inform you that all participants may upload questions and comments by scanning the QR code that you will find on the flip side of the program leaflet. And the questions for the speakers will then be collected and then answered during the Q&A discussion session. We would like to ask for your active participation in the panel discussion, and please do fill out the post-program survey and submit it to the registration desk. E-coupons will be given randomly to selected respondents. Now, having said that, first we would like to ask to the stage Dr. Fauziah Zen, Senior Economist of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Dr. Zen will present ASEAN connectivity, progress, and opportunities. Please welcome Dr. Zen with a big round of applause.
Good morning, Chairman, His Excellencies Lim Sung-nam, Excellencies, Ambassadors, and High Officials here, distinguished fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. Thank you for ASEAN Korean Center and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea for having me in this important and also timely ASEAN Connectivity Forum, and also the expanded, the word expanded is very important, I think. I would like to discuss a bit on the situations on the current situations, and then more focus on the dynamics, the determinants and influentials, forces and drivers, to look at the opportunities and challenges that we can hopefully can address and tap the opportunities. Also the current and future context of these situations, crisis, pandemics, changing in the international trade, and also digitalizations. And I hope I can provide some thoughts on the ways forward. First, that we know that the ASEAN connectivity has some commitments in the concepts and also in the cooperations. The famous one is MPAC, the master plan of the ASEAN and ASEAN connectivity, the first milestone in 2015, and aim to intra-regional connectivity integrations within ASEAN and within the broader regional framework in East Asia. And after reaching this 2015 milestone, the current one is the MPAC 2025, aims to achieve a seamlessly and comprehensively connected and integrated ASEAN that will promote competitiveness, inclusiveness, and greater sense of community. Basis, it has 3 bases. It's a physical, institutional, and people-to-people connectivity. So we can imagine that this, how the pandemic hurts these concepts on the ground. And the MPAC 2025 have 5 strategic objectives. It is a sustainable infrastructures, digital innovation, seamless logistics, regulatory excellence, and people mobility. And other than MPAC, the famous MPAC, we also have sub-regional connectivities. for example, the Greater Mekong sub-regions economic corridors, then to aim to integrating systems of road, rail, and ports that interconnects border of GMS and center of productions, centers of demands, and also gateways that include also important seaports in the regions. We also have ASEAN highway networks to enable the efficiency and development of the road infrastructures in Asia, linking Asia and European, especially Central Asia and Europe through the transport linkage and improve connectivity for landlocked countries. And we also have other sub-regional cooperation such as BIM EAGA, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, East Asian Growth Area, and then also IMT, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, and the latest one is RCEP on the trade. RCEP signed in November 2020 is the largest FTA in the world. It covers 10 ASEAN member states plus 5 East Asia, including Korea, Japan, China, Australia, and New Zealand. It consists of 30% of population of the world and 30% of total GDP. The trade among these regions consists of like 28% of the total global trade. It's very important because it provides some critical elements. It is the first FTA of China, Japan, and Korea. It has elements to support digital transformation and service liberalizations, including e-commerce, and it put ASEAN centrality as a principles of this RCEP. Let me back. Also, we have a comprehensive ASEAN development plan. It's written by ERIA and also ASEAN Secretariat. It's a comprehensive document of broad strategy for ASEAN and counterparts to achieve the deepening regional economic integration, narrowing development gaps, and advancing sustainable development. I'll get back to this later on. So about the progress, like just in the keynote speech, Ambassador already mentioned that we have some mixed success stories. Some projects are well done, some are still in the progress, some are slow, and some stuck. But it's not a surprising situation because ASEAN is not like EU. We are not a fully integrated economic area. We don't have a supranational body that can order the nations, the member nations. We don't have also pooling funds to support the lack of funds if some countries face it. So it's, we have a very diverse fiscal capacity across the regions. Because of the high autonomous level in each nation, so we have it is very influenced by political conditions. So changing governments can also change the priority. I really like to look at more in the forces and drivers. First, on the global supply chains. We know that country cooperations is driven largely by the private sector's operations, like the location of the markets, the production factors like labors and materials, and all of them are influenced by the connectivity, also influence the connectivity. So the global supply chains act as a demand push, and also the supply induced by this connectivity. And second, climate change, we know that it's really inevitable issues. It changed our views in many things. For example, in infrastructure concept, we shift from the conventional one to the climate change adaptations infrastructures, lead to the green financing demand, lead to the request how we can have the standards of the green financing green infrastructures and how we can attract the private sector to also fulfill the gap of these demands. We need this, platforms to work on that. And digitalization, that many segments of the logistics systems are replaced and also or accelerated by the digitalization. But still, physical delivery requires hard infrastructures to be there. And also we have the crisis, health crisis, commodity price, energy and foods, US monetary policy, changing the interest rates around the world, and also volatile financial sectors. Look at this, the global trade pattern changes, from 2000 to 2020. We see that the increasing volume of trade, across the regions, and also increasing trade between ASEAN and East Asia. And look at this table, especially for the Korea. We see that the Korea is on the second layer of the most important trade partners of ASEAN. It has a higher and more significant trade relation compared to India and Australia, but it's still less significant compared to the China, USA, EU, and Japan. And these two pictures see the advantages of the Korea. The left one, Korea and with China and Singapore are the best integrated economies into global liner shipping networks. You can utilize it. And the next one, the right one, it's showing the value of the export of digitally deliverable service from East Asia. And look at Korea. You have all these advantages, but not yet maximize, I think, maximize your potentials to do so. This is the simulations using the geographical simulation methods developed by ERIA and IDE Japan. I think Umezaki-san can talk more about this if you would like to know. This is trying to look at the economic impact of combining infrastructure, IT, city, and energy savings. And you can see that the cumulative growth can be very high for some regions, especially in the East Indonesia and Laos, also Vietnam. And this is critical infrastructure projects. And then now the current and future context, we have this crisis, pandemic, and changing international trade. And Southeast Asian economies, contracted by about 3.4% in 2020, rebound 3.4% in 2021, and estimated about 5% in this year, depending on which institution you refer to. And the next years, on the brink of the economic crisis, global economic crisis, the region can also is estimated will still grows about 4.3 to 5% next year. But the pandemic has cost us a lot, including the additional extreme poverty, as well as the loss, learning loss, job loss, especially in the tourism sectors and airlines. And we still have the challenges in the future, especially how do we address this scarring effect, and how we can adjust adaptively with the new normal and prepare for the next crisis or the next pandemic that may come in the future. We have different struggling this year. And the current and future context on digitalization, 2020 in the pandemic, blessing in disguise. There was additional 40 million new consumers have entered Southeast Asian digital market. Another 20 million in the first half of 2021, making it for 80% of the total 35 million, the total internet users in Southeast Asia are digital consumers. So you can see this is growing growing markets despite the challenges for cross-border digital economy. We know that the cross-border payment systems, taxations, cyber security, and harmonization of cyber data, for example. But recall that RCEP and also MPAC also supports these elements, the digital industry and digitalization. So I think this is a very, very potential industry to look at. And the last one is ASEAN Connectivity. I think my thoughts is the ASEAN Connectivity really need to be more agile, because it needs to adapt and adjust with the changes, rapid changes, and in order to tap potential sectors and attract the partners outside the ASEAN. And it needs more push from ASEAN leaders to accelerate and the implementation. And we need the close cooperation with development and business partners, especially in Asia and European region. Sorry, I don't say US because US has their own ways to determine where to go. But if the regions become more attractive, then it can attract any major partners in the world. And we also know trade is business driven, but government can facilitate to incentivize it. What kind of facilitations? For example, is to eliminate the barriers in the trade, make it a smooth process, in the whole segment of logistics systems and global value chains, make it more cost effective, and linking multimodal integrations. And like I mentioned before, digitally deliver service have potentials. I think Korea can look at it and also, but deliver the goods, digitally transacting goods needs both IT and logistic hard infrastructure system. And for South Korea, I think you can really incorporate your advantages, the technology advancements, the proximity to the Southeast Asia, and the cultural popularity, Hallyu industries, etc. I think it's very important your soft power to integrate it into the participation to ASEAN Connectivity and beyond. Thank you. Sorry for beyond this time, and thank you very much. Looking forward for these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zen, for your insightful talk and putting the forum's major concepts into perspective. Now, moving on, our next speaker is Dr. William Choong. He is Senior Fellow for Regional Strategic and Political Studies Program at ISEAS. He will be presenting ROC ASEAN Connectivity, putting the strategy into Indo-Pacific. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Choong with a big round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you to ASEAN Career Center for having me, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm like Kavi Chongkittavorn. I used to be a journalist in my past life, so I'm not exactly great at using PowerPoint. So if you lose me in the PowerPoints, just listen to what I'm saying. I'm tempted. There are so many experts on infrastructure and connectivity here that I'm going to discuss more on ROK and ASEAN relations, connectivity in a kind of a strategic perspective. It's called kind of like what Scott Marcel said earlier this morning. If there's one thing you can remember, I only have 9 minutes and 20 seconds left. If there's one thing you can remember is that it's not decided as to where the ROK is in the wider strategic order when you come to talking about minilaterals like the Quad and AUKUS and all these minilaterals that the US is actually starting. But I think that the answer is that deepening connectivity with ASEAN is the way to go, whether the ROK is part of the Quad or not, simply because it's the kind of the lowest hanging fruit that other countries like Japan and China have already taken. So the point I want to make is that connectivity is the way to go, irregardless of the administration that we are looking at. Under the Moon Jae-in administration, the new Southern policy sought to take bilateral relations to a higher level, as we can see. And connectivity is actually the glue that binds ASEAN and South Korea together, whether it's through people-to-people institutional or infrastructure links. As my colleague Fauziah has mentioned, there are lots of potential in connectivity projects, whether it's in energy, land transportation, special economic zones, or sustainability schemes. And I think it's without dispute that ASEAN has a lot of geostrategic weight with 600 million population, like Scott has said, 5th largest economy projected to hit 4th largest economy in 2030. And of course, ASEAN sits astride sea lanes of communications and is considered the fulcrum of the Indo-Pacific. But where do I see, or where do Southeast Asians see the ROK in the US-China ROK triangle? I think the manner in which South Korea engages ASEAN on connectivity, you have to be cognizant even of Seoul's interactions in the wider strategic landscape. I would say that in the new Yoon administration, at least for an external observer for myself, there's been little change in Seoul's geostrategic orientation, but also elements of substantive change. You might say that that's a kind of a diplomatic kind of answer to a difficult question. But what I will argue is that Seoul remains the US formal ally, but it's also the strategic partner of China. Of course, South Korea is the largest trading partner of China. Yet there are elements of change in Seoul's geostrategic orientation. There's a strategic tilt towards the US and the quadrilateral security grouping. We all know that in February this year, writing in Foreign Affairs, President Yoon sought to engage more with the Quad. He says he wants South Korea to be a global pivotal state, quote unquote, to advance freedom, peace, and prosperity through liberal democratic values and substantial cooperation. And he said that South Korea should promote a free, open, and inclusive order in the Indo-Pacific and participate in Quad security dialogue working groups. Of course, although South Korea is not a member of the Quad, we can see from what President Yoon has written in Foreign Affairs, he's using language of the Quad in a kind of non-Quad kind of fashion, if you get what I'm saying. And of course, there are various reasons for Seoul's kind of new tilt towards the Quad. It will give Seoul more strategic space in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, it can participate in what are less threatening elements of the Quad, be it economic security, emerging technologies, vaccines, and climate change. And thirdly, South Korea's coordination with the Quad will enable a faster response to contingencies and deter threats such as economic coercion. I think what Scott has said earlier as well, that the ROK is, is a more palatable option as a smaller power, not a great power, to smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific, in particular in Southeast Asia. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is to talk about courting ASEAN. The way I see it, there's very little difference between the Moon administration's approach to ASEAN as well as the Yoon administration's. Under the Moon administration, there was the 3 Ps: prosperity, peace, and people to people. In prosperity, we can see that ROK is ASEAN's 4th largest trading partner, 5th largest FDI source to ASEAN. From the lens of peace, we can see that the ROK participates in several ASEAN-led mechanisms, such as the ASEAN +3, the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and ADMM+. And of course, on the people-to-people angle, South Korea is chairing the ADMM+ expert working group together with Malaysia. And of course, people-to-people exchanges are strong. 2.7 million tourists from ASEAN visited ROK in 2019. And we saw somewhat 2 million tourists visiting ASEAN in 2021. Now this is, I hope you can remember this point from my presentation, which I think that the ROK is in a unique position. It's not part of the Quad, not formally, of course, but it maintains good relations with all ASEAN member countries and has deep connections with both China, and the United States. So whether the ROK formally joins the Quad or not, connectivity and enhanced cooperation with ASEAN is the most feasible option going forward. These elements enable the ROK to fly under the radar amid intensified Sino-American competition. And it should also be noted that this is a kind of approach that has been taken by the Biden administration when he switched the terminology from using free and open Indo-Pacific to saying a secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific around the end of 2020. I think if the ROK can follow this approach, and I think it already has, on deliverables like climate change and vaccines, critical and emerging technologies, the ROK is pretty much on the same track that the Americans have taken. And I think a short term for using that is to quote Tom Cruise in the movie Jerry Maguire, which is "Show me the money." As long as you can show Southeast Asians the money on the deliverables, you can get a lot of traction. This is exactly what I mean by ROK and the Quad having one cake and eating it at the same time. President Yoon's emphasis on freedom, peace, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific is in many respects similar to President Moon's emphasis on people, peace, and prosperity. But that said, the emphasis on freedom, or in other words, liberal democratic values, shows that the Yoon administration is comfortable with using the terminology of the Quad in terms of using terms such as free and open Indo-Pacific. And speaking at the ASEAN-Korean Summit in Phnom Penh in November, President Yoon called for adherence to international law, no recourse to the use of force, and unveiling South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy. He underscored South Korea's approach to freedom, peace, and prosperity in the region based on a rules-based order. And again, these are all terminology that is common to the Quad. So what I'd like to say here is that the advocacy of such principles by President Yoon underscores the fact that his administration is shedding its ambiguity between taking a side in the ensuing Sino-American competition. So China, as we know, has opposed the free and open Indo-Pacific and the Quad, given its perceived anti-China stance. But I would say that there's a way to refer to free and open Indo-Pacific principles, such as the freedom of navigation and overflight, adherence to international law, and regional connectivity in a way that it becomes a sophisticated way of voicing support for shared aspirations. Put differently, Quad countries espousing free and open Indo-Pacific principles can actually advocate such principles without specifying outright the country of concern. And I do not need to mention the country of concern here. And this approach is palatable to most, if not all, ASEAN member countries. So for fear of enraging Beijing, ASEAN has struggled to take a collective position on the Quad and free and open Indo-Pacific. So ASEAN has obviously its ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which I think is an attempt by ASEAN to put its imprimatur on this Indo-Pacific concept that has been evolving in recent years. But essentially, the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific casts the Indo-Pacific in a geographical, more cooperative frame. And I think this is an approach that the ROK has taken. In conclusion, in voicing support for free and open Indo-Pacific and the Quad, I think the Yoon administration has made inroads in the right direction. The ROK can continue to use connectivity as a way to engage ASEAN without rowling China to the use of Quad language, and so can participate in the growing Indo-Pacific experiment that has gained momentum in recent years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Choong, for sharing with us your rich insight. Now moving on, our next speaker is Mr. Kavi Chongkittavorn, Senior Fellow of Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University, and his presentation is on Beyond 2025, ASEAN Korea Connectivity. Please welcome Mr. Chongkittavorn with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. I would like to sit down because I just arrived this morning, just 30 minutes before the meeting start. If I feel a little bit disoriented, I have to apologize. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Kim for the invitation, because he asked me 3 months ago and I said yes. So I must come, no matter what. And I'm leaving within 24 hours. I have 3 good news about connectivities. First of all, ASEAN Connectivity will go on forever. Number 2, there will be more and more countries join ASEAN Connectivities. Number 3, in short, what matters the most is not all the activities, ASEAN connectivities that we talk about. It will be the third element that will come to rescue. That is people-to-people connectivities. I'm so happy to listen to Fauziah Zen, who is my colleagues at ERIA, and also William Choong, talking about in details, and previously Vice Foreign Minister has already mentioned that many dialogue countries have their projects, activities connected to ASEAN's connectivities plan. But few actions have been seen. A lot of talks. Yes, talk is important and ASEAN like it. But on ASEAN connectivities, I think Scott Marcel has outlined, he knew ASEAN very well. I have to give him credit. He was the first ASEAN ambassador to, U.S. ambassador to ASEAN. I would say that is the best thing American has done, the first in 2010. So it was ASEAN connectivity, the talk about ASEAN connectivity that has positive effect in connecting us. I think that's the most important. Otherwise, I will have to go on and speak like other panelists, talking about the existing projects for the past year, talking the progress, talking about the prospect, talking about the character and all. This is some of the things that probably I would like to highlight, but I would not be able to give you full details. This is the study done by experts reported to ASEAN that this is the challenge that ASEAN connectivity will face in 3 areas. The so-called physical connectivities. You already know, I think some of our panelists have mentioned budget constraint, competing demands for resources, unequal access to infrastructure service, among others. And then on the institutional connectivities, of course, the post-COVID pandemic and has caused small disruption and urgent needs to reconnect various transport frameworks, including the aviation and shipping market. But what, for me, as somebody who watches ASEAN and somebody who is interested in ASEAN and Korean, I would like to focus on people-to-people connectivity. That would make other ASEAN connectivity materialize in the long run. At the moment, I would say that ASEAN connectivity, the physical part and the institutional part, still a long way to go. I think it would be much better to shift the focus to people-to-people connectivities. This area, I think ASEAN has done well. Dialogue partner also have done well. And this with better people's connectivity, it will lead to better understanding and better collaboration and cooperation. This, I actually have another slide which I have not submit, is that for me, Korean has done superbly on the issues, people-to-people's connectivities, and it has already sort of taking advantage because Korean relations with ASEAN have no baggage. Have you ever seen Japan have taken 40 years to struggle the anti-Japanese, but the Korean culture, pop culture, cosmetic, everything about Korea is so popular in Southeast Asia. But yet, Korea has problem in turning this popularity into real soft power, unlike America, which has the genuine soft power. And I think this will be the only way for Korea to really play a big role, as William Choong has outlined, whether it's in the court, whether it's in the AM plus. For me, the most important is that Korea is very ambitious and now is willing to commit both funding and also policy-wise from the top. Professor Yoon Seok-yeon has mentioned in Phnom Penh that Korea, without, with full enthusiasm, that we would like to be the next ASEAN comprehensive strategic partnership. That is a very brave move by Korea. And Korea relation with ASEAN is on the rise. And the idea that Scott Marcel talked about ASEAN-Korea Solidarity Initiative is all related. That is the extra things that Korea would like to do as the comprehensive strategic partnership. In ASEAN, if you want to be comprehensive strategic partnership, you have to do extra. America has failed to do that long ago. It just started to do it recently, and due to the geopolitics, ASEAN decided to accord, they don't say the word upgrade, to accord the strategic partnership to America in principle, and let America wait for a few months because we want to give it at the same time to India. Is a geopolitical consideration. But for Korea, I think there is no doubt about it that now Korea is one of the most important strategic partner in all areas. In all three areas, I think Korean has done well. In other dialogue partners, I think there are some loopholes. Certain countries did it very well in political security. For instance, America, Japan, economics has done very well. But if you examine carefully, in the past 15 years, particularly during the Moon Jae-in government, relation with Southeast Asian has been excellent. He visits all countries twice, and he has his Southern, New Southern policy, which is currently under different name but the same content with more strategic elements. So you will see ASEAN connected with Korea even more in all aspects. And I think the biggest Korean challenge is that Korea wants ASEAN to be a prosperous nation that no hegemon or any country can dominate this region because Korea's interest is to see neutral ASEAN. And that is the only country in the region that want to see ASEAN that way, because South Korea's future depends on prosperity and neutral ASEAN. That is the most important connectivity for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chongkittavorn, for the amazing food for thought and joining us despite your incredibly tight schedule. I hope the trip doesn't sap your energy. Please do take care. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our next speaker. We have Mr. Im Han-gyu, Executive Vice President of Korea Overseas Infrastructure and Urban Development Corporation. His talk will be on value of public-private partnership for ASEAN connectivity. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Lim with a big round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving a wonderful opportunity to present Korean PPP efforts in ASEAN countries. I'm from the Korea Overseas Infrastructure and Urban Development Corporation. My corporation name is too long, and so you can easily call us regarding I will give you brief information in the middle of my presentation. I don't prepare my presentation in academic base like the previous speakers. As a humble businessman, I would like to present practical business situation, especially in PPP markets in ASEAN region. I would like to start with reminding the concept of PPP. I think all the participants already well known about that. The PPP is a long-term partnership between public and private to provide public infrastructures, utilities, and other public services. The meaning of a partnership is to share the opportunity and risk. That means the public party, the private party will be responsible for financing EPC works and operation and maintenance. At the same time, the public parties will be responsible for the revenue stream and also other political support for the project. Finally, the people can enjoy the public services like the power, electricity, or road or any other transportation and water resources, the facilities. This slide shows the ASEAN countries are facing very big financial strategy for infrastructure development. We can call it the infrastructure gap. The GI Hub, they estimated about $455 billion of infrastructure gap in ASEAN countries during 2016 to 2040. This data not include the 4 countries, Brunei, Laos, Singapore, and Philippines. That means the ASEAN countries still have very big the demand of infrastructure development by PPP project. Now I would like to explain about the Korean companies' effort to PPP project development in ASEAN countries. The first thing is the participant. The Korean PPP players consist of 5 groups. Among them, the most dominant players are construction companies. The many Korean companies, they try to enter into ASEAN market to develop the PPP project. The first, they are focused on the EPC works in before, but now they want to expand their value chains and they will enter into more PPP projects in ASEAN regions. I think SK and GS and Samsung C&T is most active players in those markets. The second group is state-owned enterprise. A state-owned enterprise consists of two groups. The first one is infrastructure. The second one, energy field. The Korean companies just started some PPP, the project in ASEAN region, and also the trading houses and energy developers. They are now started to develop ASEAN countries' PPP projects. The second one is strategy for Korean players. Korean players are aiming for totally consolidated financing provider. And so that's why to weave our policy and players and functions as into the One Team Korea strategy. The Korean infrastructure state-owned companies, they have very strong background in operation. At the same time, the Korean EPC players, they also have strong competitiveness edges in the construction. We would like to combine this one together with the Korean financing. Korean government already prepared some kind of financial support. The Korean investment company and also special purpose fund for the Global Infrastructure Fund and Plant Infrastructure and Smart City Fund. And KECAs, Korea Exim and KSURE, they are actively joining into this kind of PPP project. And also the government established KIND, my corporation, about 4 years ago. KIND is a development supporting agency for the Korean companies' overseas business development. This is the slide for the Korean PPP projects in ASEAN countries. There are more than 10 projects already developed and now operated in ASEAN countries, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Myanmar, and Philippines, and Indonesia. We have, I think, many projects, including hydropower plant and summer power plant and water treatment, and many other urban development projects also. In Malaysia, we have the gas-fired power plant. The back to KIND has conducted as co-developer and co-investor together with Korean companies. We are doing all the stage of business development, starting from deal sourcing until the financing closing. And also we invest together with the Korean companies as a final investor for the project. And KIND has 4 infrastructure cooperation center, overseas infrastructure cooperation center. Among them, 2 centers are located in ASEAN countries, one in Jakarta, Indonesia, another one is Hanoi in Vietnam. And we also provide various government-supported program, feasibility support, and the Korea City Network Program, Economic Innovation Partnership Program. And KIND finally invested about 26 million for 5 projects in ASEAN countries. It's the very small portion of KIND total investment, but we would like to increase the more development in ASEAN countries. This is our deal pipeline we are chasing now in ASEAN countries. We would like to finalize this project within 1 or 2 years or in next future. And also KIND of supported feasibility study for ASEAN countries, 20 projects in 6 countries in last 4 years. This is the baseline for our business development. It's a starting point for our future development. Finally, the KIND and Korean companies, Korean players, will continue our with ASEAN strategies to using our integrated experience and technology, and also we are aiming for total financing solution provider, and also align with SDG trend. And we will follow the needs of ASEAN countries. And finally, I would like to release Korean players the voice to ASEAN countries for their PPP project development in ASEAN region. The first thing they want to make enhanced transparency and predictability. Every PPP country, uncertainty is most crucial, the risk factor. And also, we would like to propose G2G-based PPP joint platform. Already made a joint platform with many other countries, but no result in ASEAN countries. To shorten the time, to enhance possibility of success, we will closely coordinate between two countries for the new PPP projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Lim, for your talk. We look forward to more great news coming from One Team Korea for ASEAN PPP projects. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to our next speaker, we will have Dr. Kwak Sung-il, Director of Economic and Security Strategy, Department of Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. He will present cooperation directions between ASEAN and Korea with Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative. Now, Dr. Kwak's presentation will be replaced with a recorded clip as he couldn't participate due to an unforeseen circumstances. So with that said, let us now invite him to the screen.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me at this very important and timely event. My name is Sung-il Kwak, working at Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. I would like to start my presentation with the introduction of the Korean version of the Indo-Pacific strategy. With the 23rd Korean ASEAN Summit in 2022, the Korean government announced to promote the Korean version of the Indo-Pacific strategy with the three principles of inclusion, trust, and reciprocity in order to realize the three major visions of freedom, peace, and prosperity. The Korean government emphasized that ASEAN is one of the most important partners in promoting Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy. In particular, the President Yoon proposed the Korean-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, that is KASI, to promote cooperation with ASEAN based on the principle of inclusion, trust, and reciprocity, and to promote comprehensive cooperation such as diplomacy, climate change, and the environment. The cooperation principle announced at the meeting the promotion of reciprocal and sustainable cooperation between Korea and ASEAN, the promotion of comprehensive cooperation encompassing politics, economy, society and culture, and solid support for ASEAN centrality and ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Based on the cooperation principle proposed by the KASI, it presents the direction of cooperation by sector to promote economic cooperation between ASEAN and Korea. KASI lists supply chain stabilization, economic security cooperation such as energy and coal minerals, cooperation in digital and electronic vehicle industries, and Korea-ASEAN FTA upgrade as priority areas for cooperation for common prosperity and development. In addition, as a field of cooperation for joint response to regional and international challenges, KASI provides environmental cooperation such as carbon neutrality and green growth support, air pollution mitigation, and water resource cooperation with 5 Mekong countries, strengthening cooperation in agriculture and fishery sectors, and strengthen cooperation in the vaccine and bio sectors to strengthen health capabilities. As you see, KASI focuses on supply chain stabilization, digital trade, climate change response, and health capacity building as priority areas of cooperation in the prosperity pillar. These sectors are, I believe, very important to upgrade ASEAN's economic and industrial structure. Those are very important key sectors to improve ASEAN connectivity as well. For the implementation of the prosperity sector, included in the Korean ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, I present the directions and measures of cooperation in supply chain stabilization, digital trade enhancement, and climate change responses. I suggest 4 cooperation directions in each sector based on the cooperation principle of Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative. Above all, 4 directions of cooperation are presented regarding the supply chain stabilization. First, it is necessary to diversify the supply chain of the item, highly depending on a specific country with ASEAN. I have explored whether redundant supply chain can be constructed within the ASEAN region. Unfortunately, I found that ASEAN has to strengthen its production capabilities far more than current level to work as a partner with a stable supply chain for Korea. Therefore, I emphasize the utilization of ODA for capacity building and infrastructure construction. These efforts will contribute to the establishment of ASEAN supply chain as well. Second, I also emphasize on utilization of digital technology to strengthen supply chain stability. Regarding supply chain, the application of digital technology contributes to improve the efficiency of supply chain management. The efficiency of the management is even more important when stockpiling is increased or redundant supply chain expansion is required. Third, ASEAN strategy changes of the global supply chain should be used as an opportunity for Korean firms. ASEAN countries hope to attract FDI firms to their countries amid change in supply chains. First, as a result of firms relocating in search of a stable supply chain, it is required to prepare countermeasures against intensifying competition in the supply chain. Production costs, including labor costs, are expected to increase. In addition, competition for supplementation of labor and other inputs can be intensified between the FDI firms. Meanwhile, in regard to digital trade, I suggest 4 cooperation directions. First, it is necessary to support the expansion of ASEAN digital infrastructure. Korea's ability to build digital infrastructure has reached global level. Unsurprisingly, physical accessibility to global digital infrastructure in the ASEAN region has improved to some extent, but there still exist large differences among countries. For sustainable cooperation with ASEAN, narrowing the development gap with ASEAN is important. Thus, it is necessary to pay attention to support for digital infrastructure expansion using Korea's strengths. Second, it is necessary to strengthen cooperation related to the e-government. I believe Korea is the most advanced country in this field. Western developed countries have less experience than Korea in implementing it. Third, cooperation should focus on fostering digital talent. This sector is an area where Korea has strengths as well. In addition, Korea is a country with experience that has grown by fostering competent human resources, even in the lack of natural resources. When I visited Cambodia last August, I met a director of a FDI firm. He said Cambodia lacks natural resources, but he is paying attention to fostering digital-related talent. He emphasized that it is possible to produce a software developer through the training of a software program there. Of course, it is important to strengthen digital trade cooperation through bilateral FTAs and RCEP. In order to further expand digital trade barriers such as technology standard, competition policy, and data flow regulation should be lowered or harmonized. Regarding climate change, I also suggest 4 directions of cooperation. First, it is required to prepare a cooperative system in which relevant ministry and related organizations can respond together. Because if each ministry participates in multilateral negotiations and cooperation separately, the bargaining power and the driving force of cooperation will inevitably decrease. Second, it is also important to establish bilateral climate change cooperation channels between Korea and ASEAN countries. There exist bilateral channels that deal with energy and environment-related agendas. As far as I know, bilateral channels that deal with the climate change agenda directly have not yet been established. Third, cooperation in renewable energy or nuclear energy with ASEAN must be pursued. There have already been discussed with some ASEAN countries. It is necessary to expand the scope of cooperation between two regions in environmental and water resource cooperation. Fourth, it is necessary to work together on carbon capture and carbon storage and carbon capture and utilization. Fourth, it is necessary to link bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Successful cases of bilateral projects can be used as a model and expand to multilateral cooperation. The following policy measures can be considered. Launch of a bilateral senior level consultative body to discuss supply chain, digital trade, climate change response, and cooperative development together at the same time. And second, strengthening connection of bilateral and multilateral dialogue channels with ASEAN and ASEAN member states. Third, strengthening supply chain stability through the establishment of innovation center network in ASEAN. Fourth, this is my final policy measure. Establishment of an organization for promotion of the Korean ASEAN Solidarity Initiatives. Thank you for listening, and I'm very sorry not to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwak, and all speakers. Now it is time to proceed to our panel discussion. And for that, I would like to turn the microphone over to His Excellency Im Sung-nam, our moderator. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Im Sung-nam and the panelists.
Thank you, MC, for the excellent operation of the panel discussion so far. Not by design, but I think we have been very fortunate to have the chance to hear the two views about the economic, from the economic perspective, about the connectivity between ASEAN and partners. In particular from Dr. Zen and Mr. Lim. I think both of them were talking about the connectivity issues, mainly from the economic perspective. While Dr. William Choong and Mr. Kavi were talking about the connectivity between ASEAN and partners, rather from a political or security, or in other words, non-economic perspective. So I'm going to ask each panelist a question I gathered from my own brain, and then if there are other questions from the floor, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer them too. I'd like to begin with Dr. Zen first. I thank Dr. Zen for providing us with the very broad overview of where we stand in terms of the progress ASEAN has made for cementing connectivity, as well as in terms of the progress between ASEAN and partners for further strengthening connectivity. I'd like to ask Dr. Zen whether there's anything very specific or anything very concrete she wants suggest to Korean companies or Korean government to do further in further developing connectivity between ASEAN and Korea. For instance, I think what was striking in her presentation was the emphasis upon the, I would say, digital connectivity in the post-pandemic era. And Korea has definitely an advantage in the area of telecommunication and computer networks and so on and so forth. And we are now living in the age of AI, and we all recognize the importance of data and so on and so forth. So is there anything you might want to suggest for Korea to do more in that regard? Dr. Zen.
Thank you, Chairman. I think at least 3 points that I would like to provide for the as inputs here to Korean. First, that utilizing its advanced technological mastering, yeah. So, for example, in manufacturing and also in digital industries. But if we look at the investment levels of Korea to ASEAN, it's not really significant compared to China and Japan, yeah, in East Asia. So I think you really need to put to higher investments in ASEAN and more distributed one, because if you look at the data, it's more on Vietnam and then Thailand. So there are and many other ASEAN potentials, yeah, members like Indonesia, which consists of 40% of the Asian populations and 40% of ASEAN GDP. I think you can add more significant investments in these manufacturings and also digital innovations in the regions, including the AI, the robotics, etc. And also we know that Korea is leading in semiconductors. Yeah, then you can utilize it for providing the digital and AI machines. Yeah, including the and additionally to the software, the algorithm, and also the capacity building. And second is to utilize the global attention. I think it's I'm echoing Professor Ambassador Marcel and also Pak Kavi about these soft powers. Yeah, global attentions to the Korean culture, popularity, all the popular trends can be used to promote and support Korean engagements with ASEAN partnerships. And again, if we look at the tourism data, yeah, the tourism relationship between Korea and ASEAN is not well distributed. Again, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines are the most significant counterparts with Korea, while Indonesia is, I think, because I mentioned Indonesia not because I'm Indonesian, but because Indonesia consists of 40% of the population of ASEAN, Southeast Asian. So it's quite important to enhance your tourism and culture relationship with Indonesia. And the third one is to increase the contributions from Korea to the global responsibilities, such as climate change, global health architecture, food and energy security, as well as SDGs. I think you can do more in many forms, like research and providing support to ASEAN counterparts in these issues, and contribute to the global levels, like in the UN and also in the COP, for example. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zen, for a very specific answer to my question. I think Dr. Zen seems to emphasize 3 points. Number one, Korea might want to do more, not just in Vietnam, but in other members of ASEAN as well. And number two, Korea also might want to do more in terms of people-to-people exchanges in the areas of tourism and culture. And number three, Korea also might want to do more to make contributions to the global goals, including SDG and so on and so forth. Maybe as a follow-up to the answer given by Dr. Zen, I'd like to move to Mr. Kavi. As we see on the screen, there was a question from the floor basically asking what Korea can do more to make full use of the Korean cultural waves in Southeast Asia to further cement connectivity between Korea and ASEAN. And in your presentation, I also gathered that you seem to emphasize, or you seem to introduce the notion of cultural connectivity. I think that could be the basis for many other areas of connectivity between Korea and ASEAN. So would you please be able to answer the question from the floor?
Yes, thank you very much. It is a very, very good question. Korea now is in a very good position, but still Korea does not know how to translate in concrete terms what it has enjoyed in Southeast Asia today. First of all, I have to say this first. For years and years, Korea has only one objective when they approach ASEAN. What is your position on North Korea? What is your position on peace in Peninsula? Then has changed. So under Moon Jae-in, he has spent a lot of times personally with ASEAN leader in 2019 in Busan and in Busan and also in Seoul. No other leader has spent so much time, almost 8 days altogether in 2 places. So it increased that solidarities that have translated into the latest PowerPoint. And I think there are 2 things that Korea can do excellently in cultural and education. In cultural fields, no other country has accomplished the achievements that ASEAN had done. For example, a lot of people didn't know one of the most popular group, Blackpink. One of the members is a Thai woman from Korat. And there are other 11 idols in Korea are Thai, and also there are other idols from other ASEAN countries. I think Korea has a very good, some sort of way of incubators. Some would say very harsh, just like taking entrance examination. But I think it's very good because it can give rise to talented. Korea culture that is more diverse, that is more regional based would be the way to go. At the moment, unlike America, you see a lot of diversity. You look at American movie, you have all kinds of nationalities direct. But Korean film now starting to do that also with different kinds of actor. The other area is education. I think Korea is a latecomer in education. I was so surprised when I was here earlier to learn that there are about 54,000 Vietnamese students study in Vietnam. That is the biggest contribution that Korea has done to the economic growth of Vietnam. Unbelievable. In Thailand, we have the largest number of Thais study Korean, about 45,000. But when you look back into the enrollment in Seoul, only 542 as of last month. So it tells you a lot, the power that Koreans have. But Korean distribution of whatever merit contributions in cultural and education is not equal. So you must find a way to make sure that your contribution to each ASEAN country has the kind of balance, both in education and culture. That will, in the future, translate this influence, not only selling kimchi or selling fried chicken bonchon, but can translate into concrete, soft power. I don't think at the moment Korea possesses the type of soft power that Joseph Nye has mentioned. You look at the situation in Korean Peninsula. you will see the role of ASEAN increasingly getting more important because Korea has elevated ASEAN into the regional player. This will have a long-term consequence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kavi, for a very candid answer to the question from the floor. Partly in response to the important point made by you, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that Korea has been doing a lot in terms of introducing cultures of ASEAN into Korea. For instance, ASEAN Korea Culture Center, which is sponsoring this forum, has been one of the important players in letting Korean people know and learn about the ASEAN cultures. And at the same time in Busan, I don't know whether you have had a chance to visit Busan or not, but there is ASEAN Culture House, which is solely devoted to the dissemination of ASEAN cultures in Korea. And that's the only kind of the ASEAN Culture House among partners of ASEAN.
Can I add a little bit more? I think one element that is very important between ASEAN and Korea relation is the understanding of the young people. Korean youth have very low awareness of ASEAN. On the opposite end, ASEAN have very high appreciation of Korean culture, trustworthiness, and many other characteristics. So there is an urgent need to increase mutual understanding. Otherwise, this kind of relation would not be able to sustain in the long run. So young people hold the key, not only between ASEAN and Korea. I would like to take another example. United States has one good program called YASILI, Southeast Asian Youth Initiative, that had created network of young people that linked to America, now amounted to 60,000. That was a very clever, without any much investment at all. You compare to Korea. Korea has invested so much, so many, but return, it's much less from the YASILI program. But South Korea of late has also changed in the strategy of KASI. I was happy that you also put the people element, the youth, into it, including the cultural things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kavi, for enlightening us about the importance of the youth exchange program. Because after all, in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time, the young people will be the leader of the ASEAN-Korea partnership. Let me move to Mr. Lim. Mr. Lim was providing us with very detailed presentation about what Korea has been doing, what kind has been doing in terms of PPP for developing various infrastructure projects in ASEAN. But as we heard from Dr. Zen, I think in the coming years, not just the physical connectivity symbolized by the infrastructure, but also the digital connectivity and the kind of the connectivity we don't see, it might be more important in the coming years. And in order to do that, we basically need more money. And I think kind must face a similar problem. I mean, the problem of funding. I just have learned that kind has been doing about 5 projects in ASEAN, but maybe kind might want to do much more than that, and not necessarily in building the infrastructure, but also in doing more in the area of digital connectivity. So is there anything Korean government can do more? I'm sure there are people from the Korean government here too, in terms of securing more funding for all those important projects.
Yeah. First of all, during last 4 years of operation, we finally make the investment decision for 20 projects. Total in 11 countries, 20 projects. Total investment amount from the kind is about $560 million US. And total the project value is over $10 billion US. Compared to those numbers, our investment to ASEAN countries is relatively very small. Even though we chasing the many projects in ASEAN regions, and so that's why we would like to increase the more PPP projects in ASEAN countries. And I already explained our deal pipeline in near future. And back to the moderator's question, we already see the financial difficulties in next year, coming years. Yeah, they will be very hard situation. Because of this kind of the PPP project, financing is most important factor. But I think the first thing, we don't see this kind of financial difficulties will not continue to long years. We're thinking about in long-term view, we prepare step by step. I already mentioned the operating project, chasing the project for the final stage, and also the basic deal pipelines. We divide it into 3 groups, all our project, we prepare step by step. And so also the financing, the support, we are set on the corporation. We have some budget from the Korean government. And also we are capability to borrow money from the financial market up to the 5 times of our fading capital. And so kind has some better position to other private sector participants in terms of the raising money. But the kind is the only source for the financing. We must collaborate with other financial institutions in financial market. That's why we are more close to multilateral development bank and Korean export credit agencies. They are more stable compared to other commercial financial institutions. And with those cooperation, we will try to make the best financial solution for our project in ASEAN regions. It will be very difficult, but we will try to make the best option for the project.
Thank you, Mr. Lim, for a very good answer to a very difficult question. I think, as mentioned in the keynote speech by Ambassador Mercier, China seems to have an inherent advantage vis-à-vis other capitalist partners because they can mobilize a large-scale funding rather easily. And that's why they were pretty good at promoting BRI in Southeast Asia. In that regard, while Korean government will also have to do more in terms of securing the funding for all those programs, but I also would like to remind everybody here that there is ASEAN Korea Financial Cooperation Center, which opened in April this year in Jakarta. And that was one of my small initiatives when I was ambassador in Jakarta. And I do hope that that ASEAN Korea Financial Cooperation Center can play the role of a facilitator in providing the funding for all those important projects kind of will be doing in the coming years. Thank you, Mr. Lim, again. And now let me move to Dr. William Choong. I think your point seems to be that Korea's partnership with ASEAN will be the best solution for navigating the turbulent waters in the Indo-Pacific. I agree with you, and in that regard, I'm also happy to note that the Yoon Suk-yeol government's ASEAN policy, which is named the KASI, Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, or AXI, ASEAN Korea Solidarity Initiative, has, in my view, basically inherited the spirit of New Southern policy. At the same time, it has fleshed out all those ideas, and it has doubled the size of the annual contribution to the ASEAN Cooperation Fund and other related funds. The total amount of the fund will be, annual contribution will be something like $48 million by the year 2027. I think it's a big progress in terms of numbers. Having said that, while I agree with your prescription for Korea, I have one suggestion for ASEAN. I have read every line very carefully in the AOIP, ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. My conclusion of reading that document was that it is basically heavily economically oriented platform. Maybe it's one way of telling the big powers that the Indo-Pacific should be the region of common prosperity and peace. There's just one line about security situation in the Indo-Pacific, which says that the Indo-Pacific should be the region of conversation and diplomacy, not rivalry. Just one sentence. If we all agree for the need for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, why doesn't ASEAN become more vocal in voicing out the need for that kind of security connectivity in the Indo-Pacific, rather than just talking about the economic connectivity in the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you very much. I wonder how much time you've got, but what I can tell you is that I absolutely agree with you. The ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is very economic focused, more about peace and cooperation, but essentially that's an extension of the ASEAN DNA, which is, ASEAN was formed, yes, it was formed to moderate kind of competitive dynamics between the 5 founding members, but essentially, if you look at ASEAN's history, it's more an emphasis on economics than trying to deal with difficult geostrategic questions. So the very reason why the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific was tabled was simply because the US and its friends, Japan, Australia, and India, had come out with what you call this grand concept of the Indo-Pacific. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the US-led Indo-Pacific strategy is meant as a table of principles for the region, but anyone who has some knowledge of geopolitics will know that it's aimed at China. But what ASEAN wants to do is the very opposite of what the US and the Quad is doing. They want to set the region in a more cooperative frame and focus on the economics, which is something that ROK wants to do as well. The problem with that is that it's essentially it's an ostrich strategy. You're burying your head in the sand and trying to focus on the economics, but you can't ignore the geopolitics that is swirling around you all the time. And why can't ASEAN think that way? Well, I think Kavi will agree with me, Fauziah will agree with me, that ASEAN is not a unified entity. We are not the European Union. We don't have a common strategic approach to many of the big issues. And some of the examples will be on the Taiwan question, South China Sea dispute question, on the Ukraine question. There is no common position. And the same applies to the big geostrategic questions of the day, which is where do you sit in this big rivalry between China and the United States? ASEAN doesn't have a position. Individual ASEAN member states have a position, essentially a position of hedging, but at the ASEAN level, there is no common unified position. So in the end, what you see in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is what you call a lowest common denominator, which is what is the easiest thing that members can agree on without fighting it out in the meeting room. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you, Dr. Choong, again for a very candid answer to a difficult question. Maybe we might need another session to discuss all those security implications. But having said that, I still believe that while Korea fully supports the principle of ASEAN centrality, as well as the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, because the voices of big powers are getting louder and louder, if ASEAN is less united and is less vocal on all those security issues, then the loud voices from the big powers will prevail, could prevail at the end of the day. So that's the kind of the point I wanted to make. I think we are almost at the end of the session, but there is just one question, which is what is the role of Korean private sector companies to cooperate with the ASEAN member states, utilizing the benefits of bilateral and regional FTAs? Maybe I might refer this question to Dr. Zen.
Thank you very much. I think private sectors plays a very significant role. First, that because it can influence the demand for infrastructures, because infrastructures is a responsibility of the government. Then private sectors can make a push to the governments to provide it, to facilitate their business operations. And second, it can be also influenced by these connectivity or infrastructures conditions. If there's no sufficient connectivity, then many of the business operations can be harmed by these barriers. So what can they do is that using this new RCEP and FTAs, ask for the governments what the possible. I think in some countries they already make like a technical guidance, for the private sectors to participate in these new FTA agreements, so they utilize it. If something some questions arise, then I think your governments knows better how to facilitate or solve these questions, and it will. And please do so, because it will. The government needs the inputs for the private sectors, to improve this technical guidance, to improve the agreements details, because we know that there are some layers, in the agreement, for the common ones, the domestic implications, and regulations, and then the technical ones. So the inputs from the private sectors really will be important aspects to realize and to push forward these agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zen. I think we are about 2 minutes past the timeline. I think we should end the panel discussion, and why don't we give the round of big applause to 4 panelists for the perfect answers. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What a truly riveting and lively discussion it's been. This concludes our panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, hope we can put our hands once again to thank our moderator and amazing panelists.